You're listening to theoutdoorstation.co.uk.
This podcast is sponsored by TGO Magazine.
It's said that there's a lifetime of pleasure to be found in our national trails. 15 of them in England and Wales, and 4 of them in Scotland, where they're still known as official long-distance footpaths. Now, the idea of walking long distances from one town to another isn't new, of course. Pilgrims have been undertaking long-distance walks for centuries, but it wasn't until the 1920s that the world's first long-distance trail came into being. America's Appalachian Trail was completed in 1921, and almost 90 years later, it's still as popular as ever. Our own first official trail was Tom Stevenson's Pennine Way, and although that stalwart walker thought up the idea in 1935, the route didn't actually see the light of day for another 30 years. Today, our national trails are looked after by Natural England, and in Scotland by Scottish Natural Heritage. And the only person I know who has walked them all is the long-distance walker and guidebook writer Paddy Dillon. Now, I caught up with Paddy on the phone recently. He was in between walks. He'd just come back from the Alps. And I asked him, what sort of condition are the trails in? Are they being well managed?
Yeah, because the thing is, I walked all these before. Of course, there weren't 19 altogether before. There were a few less than that. You know, there's about 4 or 5 been added since I last walked them. So, I mean, I've walked them once about 15 years ago, walked them again just recently. And on the whole, I'd say they've all improved. You know, I don't think any of them have gone, well, sounds a bit daft to say downhill, but they're all in good shape. So I'm quite pleased about that, because I can remember some places where I was wallowing in mud and things like that, and things like that have been sorted out, better drainage put in, and, you know, rerouting to get things away from squelchy areas. So I've been quite pleased at the way, you know, work has been done and signposting improved. So you're not just walking into a field and you're having to clue which is the way out at the other side. It's fairly clear now. So, you know, on the whole, the infrastructure's pretty good.
There's a wonderful diversity of landscape on offer, isn't there?
There is, yeah. I mean, that's one of the things that I like best about, say, walking the national trails, is you do get a huge amount of variety, because, you know, for one, I'm quite happy up in the hills. I'm quite happy climbing mountains. But I'm equally happy doing something a lot gentler than that. And, you know, then one week I might be quite happy by the coast, another week I might be quite happy on, say, an archaeological trail like Hadrian's Wall or Offa's Dyke, you know. And I find that the national trails, when you bundle them all up together, they have all the variety anyone could wish for.
What's your own favourite trail, Paddy?
It's a tough one, that. I mean, I nearly always feel I have to say the Pennine Way, because I was actually born and reared on its doorstep, and it was easy enough for me to walk out of the house where I used to live, and within 6 miles I'd be on the Pennine Way, and then I'd either turn north or south and go as far as I wanted on that. And I suppose it's that familiarity thing, you know. I mean, having lived so close to it, having been there when it was actually being put together, and then, of course, my own family members and friends having gone out sort of ahead of me and come back with epic tales, I just felt that, you know, one day I just have to walk that thing. So, you know, I mean, it was the first one I walked, and even the last time I looked at it, which was only last September, I mean, I'm as impressed with it, you know, just recently as I was whenever I first set foot on it. It's one that will always draw me back, I think. But all of them, you know, all the trails have got a lot going for them, and they're all quite different as well. It's almost impossible to compare them, you know, because they're so sort of contrasting, if you like. Each one has its own particular theme. But I do like the Pennine Way, and I think, you know, if I had to be pushed and say which was the best, that's the one I think I'd always put ahead of the rest.
Yeah, I suppose in a sense the Pennine Way is the sort of iconic trail, and it's that lovely thing of you know, being thought up by one person, Tom Stevenson, and then sort of seeing through to fruition eventually in, when was it, 1955 or something. It's a lovely story.
1965 it was
65,
opened,
yeah. It's a lovely story behind it, you know, that story of vision and somebody seeing the thing right through to the end.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, at the moment, the trails in England and Wales are managed by Natural England and in Scotland by Scottish Natural Heritage. Do you think we might ever see all the national trails put under the management of some sort of National Trails Association?
I think it would be handy because what I often find when I'm going and looking at these trails, not every time, but sometimes I actually get in touch with the trail managers and, the people who are actually down there doing all the sort of pick and shovel work on the trails. And they all seem to be almost, acting in isolation. I know that every so often they do all meet up in the quiet time of year, but they seem to be fairly isolated. They're all doing their own little bit on their own trails. And sometimes I do wonder whether it wouldn't be a good idea just to pull it all together and, to make sure that things are done in a more coordinated fashion. I think one of the things is it might happen within the next few years anyway, because one thing I gather is that when they finally put the Pennine Bridleway together, which is only half done at the moment, when that's finished, I gather that they have absolutely no plans whatsoever for further trails. So what might happen then is you might see a period of consolidation, where they say, well, we're not making any new trails. What are we actually going to do with the ones we've got? But I don't think anyone's, seriously, sort of talked about that sort of thing yet. I think it would be a wonderful idea. It's just I don't see anybody talking about it right now.
Would you like to see more trails?
I think yes, but, if you were to ask me where to put them, I think I'd be scratching my head, there's so much countryside available and so many wonderful themes that you could actually come up with. And I'm sure yourself, if you just look at Scotland, there are 4 long-distance footpaths there, but there's a huge amount of terrain
Absolutely.
which just isn't tapped into in that sort of respect. And yet there are these enormous, great, long, old drove roads and military roads that go wandering off for miles and miles, day after day, through the mountains. And some of those, it would be great to actually, just put a name on them and say to people, you might consider that when you've done everything else, or you might even put it first, top of your list.
I'd love to see some links between sort of, say, the top of the Pennine Way and the south of the West Highland Way at Glasgow. So that's through southern Scotland. And then from the top of the West Highland Way in Fort William, maybe a trail going all the way to Cape Wrath. Now, wouldn't that be wonderful?
It would indeed, I would love there to be, because a lot of these trails, just occasionally you get one trail finishes and another one immediately starts, like the Cleveland Way and the Yorkshire Wolds Way. They join end to end. And things like Glendower's Way in Wales ties in either end with Offa's Dyke. But most of the trails are just sitting there completely isolated from the next trail on. And sometimes I have thought to myself, especially when I've gone out and maybe walked 4 or 5 of them in a single trip, that instead of finishing one and then maybe getting the bus or train to the next one, it would be nice if they were actually joined up and you could say, well, I've done that one and now I'm just going to literally take one more step and I'm going to be on the next one. I'd love to see they talk about a trail network. It's not actually a network because they're not all joined up. They're not all crisscrossing each other, but if they were at least joined up, I think that would be wonderful, because I think that would make at least somebody think, why don't I walk the whole lot from start to finish? Why don't I start down at Land's End and finish up in Inverness or wherever? But at the moment, when you finish one trail, the next trail is maybe, 10, 15, 20 miles away.
What about this idea of a trail right round the UK coast? That would be quite a walk, wouldn't it?
It would indeed. It's thousands of miles, and of course, you've got, if you just look at small parts of that, like the Southwest Coast Path, which already exists, even when people set out to walk that, it's 630 miles. It's going to take you, 5, 6, 7 weeks, whatever, and then you keep coming across these great sort of inlets that carve right into the landscape, and you look across the other side, it's only, a couple of 100 yards away, but you're faced with a whole day's walk around it. Yeah. So with the Southwest Coast Path, they say, well, the ferries are an integral part of the route. It's not cheating to get the ferry across. It just means you're straight back on what you might call the proper coast, instead of going miles inland and maybe having to pull away from the estuary and end up on, major roads or something before you find the bridge. I think a coastal path right round Britain would be a wonderful idea. And, I've always sat back and just looked in awe whenever anyone set out to walk that route, because I think only about a dozen or so have done it so far. And I gather at the moment there's somebody in my area, a woman who's actually walking around the coastline of England, and the past 2 days she's actually been walking around Walney Island, which is offshore, of course, but it takes dedication, I think, to go out day after day after day and do something of that magnitude. And it would be great to actually see that promoted as like, maybe a real classic trail of world proportions,
What about Old Wainwright's Coast to Coast? Now that's apparently one of the most popular long distance trails in the world. Do you think that should maybe be given national trail status? There is this campaign going on, of course.
I think it should be given national trail status, and I always have thought that. But the thing is that the national trails people themselves seem to have set their face in stone against that. For whatever reason. I think it all boils down to politics in the end. They've come up with reasons like, when we establish a trail, we like it to bring economic benefits to communities along the way. The trouble with the Coast to Coast is it's already established and it's already bringing economic benefit to people along the way. So, in their view, there's no point designating it as a national trail. Now, I mean, I can understand that way of thinking, but all the same, if people are going out in droves and walking it like that, I don't think it makes the slightest bit of difference. You might as well just call it a national trail, put the waymarks in and be done with it, because people are obviously voting with their feet there. They're obviously saying this is a trail that we want to walk. And, as such, they're supporting it and they're supporting facilities along the way. And I think, basically the job is done. They might as well just accept it, call it a national trail, give it the infrastructure. And I gather at one point, when they were tidying up, I think it was one of the Yorkshire County Councils were tidying up a section of the route, they did actually put the acorn symbol on their signposts. And I think it was Hugh Westacott who actually pointed out to them, you're not supposed to use that, it's only for national trails. So all the little acorns were taken off. But just for a while, obviously somebody in authority thought it was a national trail.
Yeah, you just kind of assume. For years and years, I assumed it was a national trail.
Yeah.
But we, on TGO, we've been trying to come up with a UK equivalent of the American Triple Crown. Of course, that's the Pacific Crest Trail, the Continental Divide, and the Appalachian Trail.
Yeah.
Do you think we have any three trails in Europe that could perhaps compete with those American ones and have this sort of standard for people to to challenge people to do the sort of European Triple Crown?
Yeah, if you were looking all over Europe, I'd still make a pitch for the Pennine Way because of its long-standing sort of, history and heritage, the fact that it was the first that we had. And then if I was to look elsewhere in Europe, I'd probably look at the GR5. I mean, the trouble with that is it's very, very seasonal. You get about 3, possibly 4 months in a year when an ordinary walker can do it without being snowbound. But the idea that you would cross from one side of the Alps to the other appeals to me as much as, say, walking the length of the Pennines. And then if there was one other, I suppose I'd make a plump for the GR20, because if you're going to have a challenge, it might as well be a challenging route. Yes. And that one, out of all the trails in Europe, it really does. It seems to me it's the sort of challenge that an ordinary walker can just about pull off without having to be a rock climber. And for that reason, I'd say if you were to walk the Pennine Way, if you were to cross the Alps, and if you were to do the whole mountain traverse of Corsica, that to me, I'd give anyone a badge for that. I'd say, well done, that's your triple crown.
It's funny you mention that, because I think the last time we met was probably on the middle of the GR20 when I was in with Chris Townsend. It certainly is, I agree with you, it really is. It's a wonderful, wonderful route. One of the best routes I've ever walked, I have to say. So what about, that's the sort of European idea. What about in the UK? Do you think we have 3 routes, or could we create 3 routes in the UK that could challenge the American Triple Crown?
Yeah, what I would think of in terms of the UK, our sort of classic long-distance walk has always been a John O'Groats Land's End type thing, either one way or the other. And basically, if you look at the way the trails are laid out, the national trails, you can almost see that route evolving. And the way you were talking about routes through Scotland, I think you could extend that, having sort of linked all your Scottish routes. If you got a route from John O'Groats that came down and linked with the Great Glen Way, that linked with the West Highland Way, that somehow took you onto a section of the Southern Upland Way, and then maybe use St Cuthbert's Way to get the link with the Pennine Way, all the way down the Pennines. I'm sure there's a decent way across country to link with Offers Dyke to get you down into South Wales, and then all you need to do is cross over the Severn, and there's bound to be some decent sort of link you can get to get you onto the South West Coast Path and down to Land's End. And I think that will be John O'Groats to Land's End, incorporating major national trails with good links in between them. And I think that will be something well worth doing, because the basic infrastructure is there. All you need are the links.
Certainly a big challenge, Paddy.
Yeah.
That's looking big. Listen, how well do you think the national trails are being used? I mean, what's your own experience? Do you see a lot of people on the trails?
I see a lot of people on some of the trails, and to be quite honest, some of the trails I've seen no one on whatsoever. You always get somebody out for the day walking the dog, and at weekends people will be out just for a short stroll. So you'll see them on the trail, but they're not actually walking the whole thing. And I think there are some notoriously quiet trails. If you look at things like, say, Glyndŵr's Way in Mid Wales, or say the Yorkshire Wolds Way is fairly quiet, even though it's coming up for its 25th anniversary. Pedder's Way in Norfolk Coast Path, you see a lot of people on the coast, you see a lot of people walking, but they're not walking the whole way, and a lot of them aren't even aware that they're on a national trail. So some routes, they almost seem destined to be quiet, and then others, say like the Pennine Way, has been very, very busy in the past, and then when it had its big problems with erosion and overuse, people started falling off then. And now that it's been repaired and sort of resurfaced with these wonderful stone flagstones, people are a bit slow to get back onto it. So that route is not as busy as it used to be. And then all of a sudden you'll get something like Hadrian's Wall, declared open only a few years ago, and absolutely overwhelmed with people. So you do get some which are very, very busy, and some which are very, very quiet, and a lot which are just in between. But I think overall, what I've noticed over the years is that the National Trails authorities don't really push the trails as something for long-distance walkers. They tend to be saying to people, oh, they're great places to come out for a stroll. You can come along and do a couple of hours here and a couple of hours there. And then they seem to be saying, that we've got a national trail system, a network here, but it's not necessarily something for people to do long-distance walks on. It's just something for people to potter around on. And I don't really agree with that. I think, the primary push with a national trail should be you getting people out to walk the whole thing, the whole distance of each and every one of them. So I'm not that keen that, there seems to be this, I don't know, almost like a drive to say, just potter around on them, park your car and take a stroll and then come back and drive away and maybe come back another day. I don't really agree with that sort of, way of promoting them.
Yeah, I would concur with that, Paddy, I must admit, but I kind of suspect that the National Trails people have realised that there really aren't all that many people who do walk a trail from end to end, and they're kind of trying to justify their own expenditure in saying, well, lots of people will come and walk little sections of it.
Yeah, I think what you find is with a lot of government-type promotions, and especially things which involve tourism, and I'm not always that keen that walking should be involved with tourism, but there's always this idea that the more people you get, the more funding you'll get. So obviously, if you get people out walking the dog for an hour or two, and you tick them off as having walked on a national trail, you get more funding for your national trails. I don't agree with that approach, but I think that's probably what's happening, is that, when you do all your surveys and tick all your boxes and count all your people, you then, go away and you sing the praises of that trail based on that. But I do think that there really should be, more not sort of forcing people to walk these trails, but encouraging people to see the benefit of actually walking long distance rather than just taking a day here and a day there. Because that's what they were actually set up for. That was the vision in the first instance, was that people would put their packs on their back and walk. And, once they got over the hill, they would pitch in for the night, and then the next day they'd walk over again and again and again until they were finished. And I think that, vision is almost getting a bit muddied, and it needs to be brought back sharply and clearly.
Well, in the current issue of TGO, of course, you've been singing the praises of all the trails and have described them all for us. What's the big attraction for you, Paddy, in walking a national trail? Indeed, in walking any sort of long-distance trail?
Yeah, the big attraction for me is just seeing the country change and being a part of it. You know, I mean, my main sort of thing with just going out of the door in the first place is just to be there. Just to be there, be part of it. But if I just stand in one place the whole time, then yes, you know, I'll notice things changing around me. But I like to see a bit more change. So I walk through the scenery, you know, I walk through the landscape, and I see the things, you know, sort of just ticking over nicely, if you like. You know, I mean, 1 minute I'll be climbing a hill, I get a wonderful view from the top, then I come down to a village, there might be an old church to have a look inside. I'm just interested in anything that sort of impinges on my consciousness as I'm travelling. So it can be, you know, I mean, I could come up with 100 reasons per day to actually be there. I'll just be interested in 1 minute a tiny little flower that just happens to be by my foot, you know, a curious clump of moss that's stuck onto a damp patch of a wall. You know, I'll be as interested in walking through a woodland as I am walking over a hill with a wonderful view. And, you know, I'll get as much fun walking beside a nice quiet river as I will being on a cliff top with the waves pounding in at the bottom. So for me, it's the variety and just, you know, the sheer joy of just being a part of it. And to end up in a different place each night, I think, to me, that's important. I don't like the idea of being in one place and doing lots of circular walks. You know, what I tend to see is walking around in circles makes me dizzy. I want to see what's over the next hill and then the one after that and just keep going. And it's that sense of just keeping going, you know, that you've actually got, you know, a route ahead of you to follow, and you know that the facilities and things are all there waiting for you. You just have to wander over in your own good time. And it's all about just pacing yourself and taking it nice and easy. You know, I know some people will almost attack a route. You know, they'll literally bust their guts over it, and they'll claim to enjoy it as much as I do. But my thing is just to plod along at my own pace and just enjoy it as immensely as possible. And, you know, that I find I can do quite easily on national trails, and when I finish one I'm quite ready to start another, and you know, having done them twice, it wouldn't surprise me if I end up doing them a third time.
Good for you. Now, when you're walking along one of these trails and perhaps writing a guidebook to that trail, how do you physically go about that? Do you walk along with a notebook and pencil in hand, or do you write up your notes in the evening? How do you actually do it?
What I actually do is I have a tiny little computer in my pocket, and every time I reach something that needs to be written down, I flip the thing open and I do it there and then. So if I reach a signpost and it's a choice of left and right, I'll flip the computer open, I'll write down turn left, and I mean left then. So in the evening I don't have to write that down, I don't even have to remember it. In the evening what I'll do is I'll go through all those notes, and I'll just make sure that, you know, the full stops are in the right place and everything is spelt properly. And it also means that when I get home, basically the book is written. What I have to do then is maybe write an introduction and put some appendices together, but the actual route description is written, and I know it's right because it was done while I was standing there. You know, unless I literally mix up my left and right hands, left means left and right means right. And when I've actually got the map in front of me, and when I'm looking at the signpost and looking at the name of the church and the museum, I write that down as I see it. So there's no question of trying to interpret scribbled notes or to unfold the map and say, now, where was it? Where was the place with the, do you know, it's all gone. None of that at all. I do it on the spot and I know it's done then.
So
and the evenings is basically for editing, and then the next day is a whole new day and a whole new chapter.
Yeah, so you're literally writing a guidebook on the hoof.
Yeah, when I come home, basically it's all written, and all
lovely.
I have to do is sit down and do the introduction. But even with the introduction, I'll actually have a little Word file on the run, and if there's anything that just suddenly occurs to me, I'll pop it down there. But usually the introduction is the last thing that gets done, and a few appendices bundled in at the end, useful contacts and things like that. But the actual description, I feel, if you don't do it on the spot, if you try and rely on memory or reinterpreting notes, or worst of all, listening to a dictaphone, because you usually have to listen 3 times to figure out what it was you were saying into it with the wind blowing, and you've still got to write that down in note form before you can write it any further. So you end up writing the guidebook maybe 10 times doing it that way. And that's something I realised some time ago I could do without that. And basically, if I write a guidebook this way, it gives me more time on the hills because I'm spending less time at home fiddling around with the paperwork.
Well, that's got to be a good idea. Now, finally,
Yeah.
Paddy, what are your plans for 2007? You got any big trails planned for this year?
Yeah, the main thing will be the GR5, which is a route that goes from Lac Le Mans, which is the biggest lake on the northern side of the Alps, all the way over the Alps to the Mediterranean at Nice, and then back again. And I think that's about 400 miles both ways, so that will be 800 miles over the Alps in the summer, and I'm going to give it about 10 weeks. There are all sorts of variations to the GR5 that I need to check as well, and they need to be checked both ways. So that's what I'm going to be doing, and I'll be there with my little computer, and I'll be taking note of how long it takes to get up the hill, how long it takes to get down, what all the facilities are in the little villages and towns I hit along the way, transport links to and from the route, and basically I'll have a whale of a time doing it. And when the weather's lousy, I'll still be doing it. And when the weather's great, I'll be doing it, but enjoying it a lot more.
I'm sure many
and
of
then
our
I come home and churn out the guidebook.
I'm sure many of our listeners will agree with me that you have a blessed lifestyle, Mr. Dillon.
It suits me anyway.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Paddy, and best of luck on the GR5. And I'm
Thank
sure
you very much.
we'll maybe catch up with you before you go off there. So thanks a million.
Yeah. Okay then.
Cheers, Paddy.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.
Find out how easy it is to subscribe to all our free programmes. Visit our website at theoutdoorstation.co.uk.